The bell rang, a sharp sound reverberating through the corridors of Lincoln High School, signaling the end of another exhausting class. For most students, it meant laughter, quick conversations, and a chance to relax before their next subject. For Ethan Carter, it was a countdown to the part of the day he dreaded most, the gauntlet through the crowded hallways. At 15, Ethan was tall for his age but carried himself with an almost deliberate smallness, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed firmly on the scuffed floor tiles. His curly brown hair often fell into his hazel eyes, but he never bothered to push it away. It was better not to meet anyone's gaze. Today, like every other day, he trudged through the throng, hoping to escape unnoticed. He never did. "Hey, Ethan. Nice shuffle. You practicing for the world's slowest race?" Jason Miller's voice cut through the hum of the hallway, sharp and loud enough to draw attention. Laughter erupted around him, led by Megan Price, Jason's ever-present accomplice. She smirked as she leaned casually against the lockers, her perfectly straight blonde hair cascading over one shoulder. Ethan froze for a split second, his pulse quickening. "Keep walking. Don't respond." He adjusted the straps of his overstuffed backpack and quickened his pace. But Jason wasn't done. "Careful, Megan," he continued, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Don't startle him. He might trip over his own feet." More laughter. Ethan's ears burned, and his vision blurred slightly as he made it to the stairwell. He didn't hear most of what was said after that, but it didn't matter. The words lingered long after the voices faded. Home offered little respite. His mother, Amanda, was already home from her shift at the diner, slumped at the kitchen table with a stack of unopened bills in front of her. She smiled when Ethan entered, but the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. "Hey, sweetie. How was school?" Ethan hesitated. "Fine," he mumbled, dropping his bag by the door. Amanda didn't press further. She never did. As much as she cared for her son, her own struggles to keep them afloat after his father's death left her with little energy for anything else. Ethan knew this and didn't want to add to her burden. After a dinner of reheated pasta, Ethan retreated to his room, shutting the door firmly behind him. The walls were bare except for a single shelf crammed with books and a few framed photos. He reached for one of them, a picture of him and his father at the local pool. They were both grinning, water dripping from their hair. His father had written something on the border in blue marker, "The water washes it all away." Ethan stared at the picture, his chest tightening. He hadn't been back to that pool since his father's passing. Swimming had been their thing, a place where Ethan had felt confident and free. He placed the photo back on the shelf and sat on the edge of his bed, his mind racing. By the next morning, he'd made up his mind. The community pool hadn't changed much in the 5 years since Ethan had last visited. The familiar tang of chlorine hit him as he walked through the glass doors, clutching the strap of his backpack like a lifeline. The receptionist, a cheerful woman with red glasses, greeted him with a warm smile. "Can I help you, young man?" I wanted to ask about swim lessons," Ethan stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Her face lit up. "You're in luck. Coach Harris runs beginner classes early in the morning. He's a tough one but the best around. There's a slot open tomorrow at 5 a.m. How does that sound?" Ethan hesitated. 5 in the morning? That sounded daunting. But he nodded. "I'll take it." The receptionist handed him a registration form. "Great. Just fill this out. And don't worry if you're nervous. Everyone starts somewhere." The following morning, Ethan's alarm jolted him awake at 4:30. He dressed quickly, grabbing an old pair of swim trunks and a towel before sneaking out of the house. His bike ride to the pool was chilly, the streets eerily quiet under the pre-dawn sky. When he arrived, the pool was a serene expanse of shimmering blue under the fluorescent lights. Coach Harris stood at the edge, a burly man in his 50s with a whistle around his neck and a no-nonsense expression. "You must be Ethan," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Ethan nodded, clutching the straps of his backpack. "Well, Ethan, let's see what you've got. Hop in and give me a lap." The first lap was a disaster. Ethan flailed more than swam, his movements awkward and inefficient. By the time he reached the end of the pool, he was gasping for air. Coach Harris chuckled. "All right, you're not Michael Phelps, but we can work with this. The most important thing is that you showed up. Now, let's start with the basics." For the next hour, Harris walked Ethan through proper breathing techniques, arm movements, and kicking. It was grueling, but Ethan listened intently, soaking up every piece of advice. "You're not here to be perfect," Harris told him at the end of the lesson. "You're here to be better than you were yesterday. That's the goal." Ethan pedaled home with sore muscles and damp hair, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope. At school, Jason and Megan continued their taunts, but Ethan found himself less affected. Their words still stung, but they didn't weigh him down as much. Olivia, his best friend, noticed the change. "You're quieter than usual," she remarked one afternoon. "Not in a bad way. It's like you're calmer." Ethan shrugged, but a small smile crept onto his face. "Maybe I'm just tired." Olivia smirked. "Tired of their nonsense, I hope." That night, as Ethan lay in bed, his body aching from the day's exertion, he thought about his father's words on the photo, "The water washes it all away." For the first time, he believed it might be true. And so, the next morning, he returned to the pool. Then the morning after that. Each time, his strokes grew stronger, his confidence steadier. The insults at school didn't stop, but Ethan was no longer running from them. He was swimming through them. The alarm blared at 4:30, piercing the stillness of the early morning. Ethan groaned, his muscles stiff and sore from the previous day's swim. But there was no hesitation as he swung his legs off the bed and reached for his gear. This was his new normal now. The ride to the pool was becoming routine. The quiet streets and the crisp morning air gave Ethan a rare sense of peace. It was still dark when he arrived, the dim glow of the pool's lights spilling onto the pavement. Inside, Coach Harris was already waiting, clipboard in hand. "Morning, Ethan." "Let's get to it," Harris said, his voice brisk but not unkind. Ethan nodded, dropping his bag on a bench. He tightened his goggles and approached the water, which reflected the fluorescent lights like a mirror. His first dive was smooth. Well, smoother than before. He surfaced quickly, finding a rhythm as he swam the first lap. "Good, good," Harris shouted from the edge. "Don't fight the water. Move with it. Your legs need to kick harder on the return." Ethan adjusted, focusing on the motions Harris had drilled into him the previous day. The water pushed back against him, his muscles burning as he fought through it, but he kept going. The hour passed in a blur of laps, corrections, and occasional encouragement. By the time Harris blew his whistle to signal the end of the session, Ethan was spent. He pulled himself out of the pool, collapsing onto the bench as he caught his breath. "Not bad, kid," Harris said, handing him a towel. "You've got the grit, and that's half the battle. Just keep showing up, and you'll surprise yourself." As Ethan dried off, he noticed another swimmer watching him, a boy about his age, with a confident smirk and a racing cap. Ethan looked away, uncomfortable under the scrutiny. "That's Jacob," Harris said, noticing Ethan's glance. "State-level competitor. He trains here in the afternoons, but he likes to show up early sometimes. Don't let him intimidate you." "I'm not intimidated," Ethan lied, though the knot in his stomach told a different story. By the time he returned home, the sun was beginning to rise, casting a pale orange glow over the neighborhood. Amanda was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. She looked up as Ethan entered, her eyes widening slightly. "Where have you been so early?" she asked, her tone curious but not accusatory. "Swimming," Ethan replied, keeping his voice casual. Amanda blinked, clearly surprised. "Swimming? Since when?" "Just started," Ethan said, grabbing an apple from the counter. "I thought it'd be good to try something new." Amanda studied him for a moment, then smiled. "Well, I think that's great. Your dad would have been proud." The mention of his father sent a pang through Ethan's chest, but he nodded. "Yeah, maybe." At school, the day felt slightly less daunting. Jason and Megan, predictably, didn't miss an opportunity to take a jab at him. "Hey, Carter," Jason called out during lunch, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "Heard you're trying to be a swimmer. Better watch out, Megan. He might splash you next time it rains." The table erupted in laughter, but Ethan barely acknowledged it. He sat down at the far end of another table, his face calm. Olivia joined him a moment later, her tray clattering onto the surface. "You're getting better at ignoring them," she said, popping a grape into her mouth. "I'm just tired," Ethan replied with a shrug, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. "Tired of them or tired in general?" Olivia asked, raising an eyebrow. Ethan hesitated. Olivia had been his best friend since they were kids, and he trusted her more than anyone. Still, he wasn't ready to share everything yet. "Both," he said finally. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's routine solidified. Early mornings were reserved for swimming, where Harris pushed him to refine his technique. "Your strokes are cleaner, but you need to work on your endurance," Harris said one morning after a particularly grueling session. "The longer you can last, the stronger you'll be. And strength isn't just physical, it's mental." The words stuck with Ethan. He found himself repeating them in his head during the day, especially when Jason's taunts grew more creative. One afternoon, as Ethan opened his locker, a damp towel fell out, releasing a pungent chlorine smell. A note was taped to it. "Good luck sinking." Ethan clenched his jaw, crumpling the paper in his fist. When he turned, Megan was leaning against the lockers a few feet away, smirking. "You should thank Jason for the inspiration," she said sweetly. Ethan didn't reply. He simply walked away, ignoring the snickering that followed him. Despite the bullying, something inside Ethan was changing. The pool had become a sanctuary, a place where he felt capable and in control. The steady rhythm of his strokes, the cool embrace of the water, it all helped him focus, pushing the noise of the world to the background. One morning, after a particularly exhausting session, Harris stopped Ethan as he was leaving. "Got a minute?" the coach asked. "Sure," Ethan said, wiping his face with a towel. "There's a school competition coming up," Harris said, his tone measured. "It's nothing big, just a friendly meet between local schools. I think it'd be good for you." Ethan froze. "Me? Compete? Why not?" Harris asked, crossing his arms. "You've been putting in the work. It's a chance to see how far you've come." Ethan's mind raced. The idea of standing in front of a crowd, under the scrutiny of his peers, made his stomach churn. But Harris's words from earlier echoed in his mind. Strength isn't just physical, it's mental. "I'll think about it," Ethan said finally. At school, Olivia was ecstatic when Ethan told her about the offer. "You have to do it," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. "I don't know," Ethan replied, shifting uncomfortably. "What if I embarrass myself?" "You won't," Olivia said firmly. "And even if you don't win, who cares? The fact that you're even considering it is huge." As the days went on, Ethan found himself leaning toward accepting the challenge. Harris increased the intensity of his training, introducing drills that left Ethan gasping for air. But with each session, Ethan grew stronger, more confident. One evening, after a particularly brutal practice, Ethan sat by the edge of the pool, staring at the rippling water. He thought of his father's words again, "The water washes it all away." Maybe it was time to see just how much he could wash away. Ethan stood at the edge of the pool, staring at his reflection in the water. The surface rippled slightly under the breeze of the indoor fans, distorting his image. It was the night before the sign-up deadline for the upcoming school swim meet, and he couldn't shake the knot of apprehension in his stomach. "You're overthinking it again," Olivia's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. She was sitting cross-legged on a bench nearby, her phone in hand. Ethan sighed, pulling off his swim cap and tossing it onto his bag. "Maybe this isn't a good idea. What if I make a fool of myself?" Olivia raised an eyebrow. "You've been training for weeks. You're stronger than you think, Ethan. Besides, the point isn't to win, it's to prove to yourself that you can do it." "Easy for you to say," he muttered. "You don't have half the school waiting to laugh if I screw up." "Do you even hear yourself?" she said, standing up and crossing her arms. You're letting Jason and Megan live rent-free in your head. Competing isn't about them. It's about you. Ethan remained silent, unsure how to respond. Olivia softened her tone, stepping closer. Look, you've already come so far. Whether you realize it or not, you're already different from the guy who used to let them walk all over him. The words hung in the air as Ethan stared at the water again. Slowly, he nodded. All right. I'll do it. The next morning, Ethan signed the form during his lunch break. As he handed it to Coach Harris, a mix of determination and dread settled in his chest. By the end of the day, the news had spread like wildfire through the school. Did you hear? Jason's voice echoed through the cafeteria. Carter thinks he's a swimmer now. He signed up for the meet. Megan smirked from beside him. Maybe he'll dog paddle his way to the finish line. The table erupted in laughter, but Ethan kept his head down, focusing on his tray. Olivia nudged him with her elbow. Don't let them get to you. I'm not, Ethan replied, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. After school, Ethan threw himself into training with a new intensity. Harris increased the difficulty of his drills, pushing him harder with each session. The early mornings grew colder, and the workouts more grueling, but Ethan didn't complain. He had a goal now, and for the first time, he felt like he was swimming toward something rather than away. Your endurance has improved, Harris said one morning as Ethan completed his final lap. But your turns need work. A bad flip turn can cost you seconds, and seconds matter. Ethan nodded, his breath heavy as he leaned against the pool's edge. I'll keep practicing. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan's progress became undeniable. He could feel the strength in his strokes, the precision of his breathing, and the rhythm of his kicks. Yet, doubts lingered in the back of his mind. The week before the meet, Harris introduced Ethan to the starting blocks. Climbing onto the platform felt surreal. Ethan's heart pounded as he crouched into position, his toes gripping the edge. Focus on your dive, Harris instructed. Enter the water cleanly and keep your body streamlined. Go when I blow the whistle. The sharp tweet of the whistle startled Ethan, but he pushed off instinctively. His body sliced through the water, and he quickly found his rhythm. When he surfaced, Harris was nodding. Not bad for your first try, he said. But remember, this isn't just about speed, it's about control. You have to own every movement. Ethan replayed those words in his head as he biked home. That night, he stayed up late, visualizing his dive over and over again. The day of the meet arrived faster than Ethan expected. The school's aquatic center was packed with students, parents, and teachers, the air buzzing with anticipation. Ethan stood in the locker room, adjusting his goggles with trembling hands. You okay? Harris asked, his voice calm but firm. Ethan nodded, though he felt anything but. Listen, Ethan, Harris said, placing a hand on his shoulder. You've done the work. Now go out there and give it your all. It's not about the result, it's about the effort. Got it? Yes, coach, Ethan replied, his voice steadier than he felt. When he stepped onto the pool deck, the noise hit him like a wave. His classmates filled the bleachers, their faces a blur of excitement and chatter. He spotted Olivia holding a handmade sign that read, Go, Ethan. Her grin was infectious, and he felt a small flicker of courage. Jason and Megan were seated a few rows behind her, their smirks unmistakable. Jason mimed a dramatic belly flop, and Megan laughed, but Ethan forced himself to look away. Competitors for the 50-meter freestyle, please report to the starting blocks, the announcer's voice boomed. Ethan's heart raced as he approached his lane. Jacob was 2 lanes over, exuding confidence as he adjusted his swim cap. Ethan tried not to compare himself but couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place. The referee blew the whistle, and Ethan climbed onto the block. The crowd hushed as the competitors crouched into position. Take your marks. Ethan's entire body tensed, every muscle coiled like a spring. The buzzer sounded, and he launched himself into the air. The dive was clean, his best yet. The water enveloped him, cool and familiar, as he powered through the first few strokes. He focused on Harris's advice, stay streamlined. Own every movement. For the first 25 meters, Ethan felt strong. His strokes were steady, his breathing controlled. But as he approached the turn, nerves got the better of him. His flip turn was clumsy, and he lost precious seconds regaining his rhythm. Panic threatened to creep in, but Ethan forced himself to focus. One stroke at a time. The final stretch was a blur of effort and determination. When he touched the wall, gasping for air, he glanced at the scoreboard. He hadn't won. But he wasn't last either. The crowd erupted into cheers, and for a moment, Ethan couldn't process what was happening. He turned to see Olivia screaming his name, her sign held high. Even Harris was clapping, a rare smile on his face. As Ethan climbed out of the pool, Megan's mocking smirk was gone, replaced by a look of stunned silence. Jason didn't say a word. Jacob approached him, offering a nod. "Not bad, Carter," he said. "You've got potential." Ethan blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Thanks," he managed to say. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something new, a sense of pride, not just in what he had done, but in who he was becoming. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was learning to thrive. The school day after the meet was unlike any Ethan had ever experienced. For the first time, he wasn't just that quiet kid or the target of Jason and Megan's ridicule. Whispers followed him through the halls, but they weren't mocking. "Did you see Ethan yesterday? He was actually pretty good. I didn't know he could swim like that." Ethan caught fragments of conversations as he passed, keeping his head down despite the strange surge of pride swelling in his chest. Olivia met him by his locker, grinning ear to ear. "You're a celebrity now," she teased, nudging him playfully. "I wouldn't go that far," Ethan muttered, though he couldn't hide the faint smile creeping onto his face. "You should. That was amazing yesterday, Ethan. People are finally seeing what I've known all along, that you're a fighter." Before Ethan could reply, Jason and Megan rounded the corner. Jason's usual smug grin was nowhere to be seen, but Megan, ever the opportunist, was quick to close the distance. "Ethan," she called out, her tone unusually cheerful. "That was some performance yesterday. I mean, I didn't think you had it in you." Ethan stiffened, unsure of how to respond. Olivia stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "What do you want, Megan?" "Relax," Megan said, holding up her hands in mock innocence. "I'm just saying, it was impressive. Maybe we were wrong about you, Ethan." Jason loitered behind her, his expression unreadable. Ethan glanced at him, half expecting a sarcastic remark, but none came. "Thanks," Ethan said simply, turning back to his locker. As Megan walked away, Jason lingered for a moment before following. Olivia leaned in. "What do you think that was about?" "No idea," Ethan replied, though his mind churned with possibilities. Training continued with renewed intensity after the meet. Harris didn't let up, increasing the pace and complexity of the drills. "You've proven you can hold your own," he told Ethan one morning, watching as the boy completed a grueling set of laps. "Now it's time to push beyond that." Ethan threw himself into the challenge, his movements sharper and more purposeful with each passing day. The pool had become more than just a place to train. It was a haven, a place where his insecurities seemed to dissolve with each stroke. At school, things were shifting in unexpected ways. Megan began sitting closer to Ethan in class, occasionally offering him half-hearted compliments or trying to make small talk. Ethan was polite but distant, unsure of her motives. Jason, on the other hand, was harder to read. He seemed less confrontational, though his silence carried its own tension. Ethan couldn't tell if Jason was rethinking his usual behavior or simply biding his time for another round of mockery. One day, during lunch, Megan approached Ethan's table with a tray of food and sat down uninvited. Olivia raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "So, Ethan," Megan began, twirling a strand of her hair, "are you thinking about entering the regional qualifiers next month? I mean, you've got the talent." Ethan hesitated. "I don't know yet. Coach Harris hasn't said anything." "You totally should," Megan said, her voice dripping with enthusiasm. "It'd be great for the school, and, for you." Olivia crossed her arms. Why the sudden interest, Megan? You never cared about Ethan before. Megan's smile faltered for a split second, but she quickly recovered. People can change, can't they? Maybe I just want to be supportive. Ethan exchanged a glance with Olivia but chose not to engage. He wasn't sure what Megan's game was, but he wasn't about to let her distract him. Later that afternoon, as Ethan was walking to his bike, he spotted Jason leaning against the rack, waiting for him. "What do you want?" Ethan asked, his voice steady but wary. Jason shrugged, kicking at the ground with his sneaker. "Look, about before." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Before? You know, all the stuff I said. The jokes." "I guess I was just," Jason trailed off, uncharacteristically at a loss for words. Ethan folded his arms. "Just what?" "Just being a jerk, all right?" Jason said, his voice laced with frustration. "I didn't think you'd actually stick it out. But you did. That's cool, I guess." Ethan blinked, caught off guard by the admission. "Thanks, I guess." Jason looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes for the first time. "Look, Megan's just pretending to care. Don't let her mess with your head." And with that, Jason walked away, leaving Ethan more confused than ever. Back at the pool, Harris dropped a bombshell during their post-practice meeting. "The regional qualifiers are coming up in a month," he said, pacing back and forth. "It's a big step up from what you've done so far, but I think you're ready." Ethan's heart raced. "You really think so, Coach?" Harris stopped, his intense gaze locking onto Ethan's. "I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. You've got potential, Ethan. Now it's time to see what you can really do." The thought of competing on a larger stage filled Ethan with both excitement and dread. The school meet had been nerve-wracking enough. Could he handle the pressure of regionals? As the days passed, Ethan threw himself into training with even more determination. Harris introduced new drills to build his stamina and refine his technique. The workouts were brutal, but Ethan embraced the challenge, his confidence growing with each passing session. At school, the whispers and rumors continued, but Ethan paid them little mind. Jason's warning about Megan lingered in the back of his mind, and he kept his distance. One afternoon, after a particularly tough practice, Ethan stayed behind to clean up. As he gathered his things, Harris approached him. "Ethan," he said, his tone uncharacteristically soft, "you've come a long way, but there's something you need to remember. No matter what happens at regionals, this isn't just about winning. It's about proving to yourself that you're capable of more than you ever thought possible." Ethan nodded, Harris's words resonating deeply. He wasn't just swimming to compete, he was swimming to reclaim his sense of self. The road to regionals was far from over, but for the first time, Ethan felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. The month leading up to the regional qualifiers passed in a whirlwind of training, schoolwork, and an undercurrent of tension Ethan couldn't shake. Every morning began with the familiar chill of the pool and Coach Harris's sharp whistle echoing through the humid air. The workouts had become grueling, longer laps, faster drills, and endless repetitions of his weakest techniques. Harris was relentless, but Ethan didn't complain. This was what he had signed up for, and he wasn't about to back down. One morning, Harris stopped him mid-lap, his voice firm. "Ethan, your speed's improving, but your turns are still costing you. That half-second delay is going to matter at regionals." "Again?" Ethan nodded, pulling his goggles into place before diving back in. Each flip turn felt like a battle, against the water, his fatigue, and the nagging voice in his head that wondered if he was really cut out for this. By the end of the session, his muscles ached so fiercely he could barely pull himself out of the pool. "Good work today," Harris said as Ethan wrapped himself in a towel. "But remember, swimming says much about your head as it is about your body. You've got to believe you belong out there." Ethan nodded, but the doubt lingered. At school, the buzz about his upcoming competition was impossible to ignore. Olivia remained his steadfast cheerleader, her enthusiasm unwavering. "You're going to crush it," she said one afternoon as they sat in the library, her voice a little too loud for the quiet space. "Let's focus on not embarrassing myself first," Ethan replied, half joking. She rolled her eyes. "You've got this, Ethan. Just remember how far you've come. Megan, meanwhile, had only intensified her strange attempts at friendliness. She started appearing at Ethan's table during lunch more frequently, her compliments growing more saccharine by the day. "Ethan," she said one afternoon, leaning closer than necessary, "I was thinking, after you win at regionals, we should totally celebrate. Maybe grab pizza or something." Olivia, sitting across from them, snorted. "Wow, Megan. You've really turned over a new leaf, huh?" Megan ignored her, flashing Ethan a wide smile. "I'm serious. You deserve it." Ethan forced a polite smile, not sure what to make of her sudden interest. Jason's warning replayed in his mind, and he kept his response neutral. "We'll see." As the qualifiers approached, Ethan's anxiety reached a fever pitch. The night before the event, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he forgot everything Harris had taught him? What if he choked under the pressure? He sat up, glancing at the framed photo of him and his father on the shelf. His father's words seemed almost mocking in the stillness of the night. "The water washes it all away." Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I hope you're right, Dad." The day of the regionals dawned bright and cold. Ethan arrived at the aquatic center early, the parking lot already bustling with competitors and spectators. Inside, the air buzzed with energy. Swimmers stretched, coaches barked instructions, and the scent of chlorine was overpowering. Harris greeted him near the warm-up lanes, his expression calm but serious. "All right, Ethan. This is it. Remember everything we've worked on. Stay focused, don't panic, and most importantly, don't let anyone else get in your head." "Got it." "Got it," Ethan said, though his hands trembled as he adjusted his goggles. As he warmed up, he caught sight of Jacob, the state-level swimmer he'd met weeks ago. Jacob nodded in acknowledgement, his expression unreadable. "Ready for the big leagues, Carter?" Jacob asked as they crossed paths near the starting blocks. Ethan forced a small smile. "I guess we'll find out." The first few events blurred together as Ethan watched from the sidelines, the tension building with each passing minute. When his name was finally called for the 100-meter freestyle, his heart hammered against his ribcage. He stepped onto the block, the noise from the crowd fading into a dull roar as he focused on the water ahead. "Take your marks." The buzzer sounded, and Ethan dove in. The water felt like home, cool and familiar as he propelled himself forward. His strokes were strong, his breathing steady. He reached the first turn and executed it cleanly, a surge of relief washing over him. But halfway through the second lap, fatigue set in. His arms felt heavier, his legs slower. He could see the competitor in the next lane pulling ahead, the gap widening with each stroke. "Focus. Don't stop now." Ethan pushed harder, his body screaming in protest. He reached the final turn, his flip smoother than before, and powered through the last stretch. The finish line loomed closer with every stroke, and he gave everything he had left. When he touched the wall, the cheers from the crowd hit him like a wave. Gasping for air, he turned to the scoreboard. He hadn't won, but he wasn't at the bottom either. Third place. The tension in his chest eased slightly as he climbed out of the pool, his body trembling with exhaustion. Harris met him with a firm pat on the back. "Good work, Ethan. You held your own out there." Ethan nodded, still catching his breath. Olivia waved from the stands, her face glowing with pride. As he towel-dried his hair, Jacob approached, his expression less stoic than usual. "Not bad, Carter," he said, extending a hand. "You've got potential." Ethan shook his hand, a faint smile breaking through his exhaustion. "Thanks." That evening, as he sat with Olivia and Harris, the weight of the day began to sink in. He hadn't won, but he'd competed, and he'd held his ground. For the first time, he felt like he belonged, not just in the water, but in his own skin. There was still more to prove, more to achieve. But for now, Ethan allowed himself to feel something he hadn't in a long time. Pride. The state championship venue was massive, the kind of place Ethan had only seen on television. Rows of bleachers stretched high above the pool, packed with spectators waving banners and cheering for their teams. The water gleamed under the bright stadium lights, a shimmering expanse that seemed both inviting and intimidating. Ethan stood by the warm-up area, his heart pounding as he absorbed the electric energy of the crowd. Every stroke he'd practiced, every early morning he'd endured, had led to this moment. Coach Harris approached, clipboard in hand and an air of calm that Ethan envied. "All right, Ethan. You've done the work. You've earned your spot here. Now go out there and swim your race." Ethan nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He caught sight of Olivia in the stands, waving a bright yellow sign that read, "Ethan Carter, swim like a champion." Her infectious enthusiasm brought a small smile to his lips. But as he scanned the crowd, he noticed someone unexpected, his mom. Amanda stood near the middle of the bleachers, a mixture of pride and nervousness etched on her face. She gave him a small wave, and Ethan's chest tightened. He hadn't told her about the championship, unsure if she'd have the time or energy to come, but seeing her there filled him with a surge of determination. When his event was announced, Ethan walked toward the starting blocks, his legs feeling heavier with each step. His competitors were already there, confident, focused, and ready. Among them was Jacob, who gave Ethan a nod of acknowledgement as he adjusted his goggles. "Big stage, Carter," Jacob said, his tone almost teasing. "Let's see what you've got." Ethan didn't reply, his attention fixed on the water ahead. He climbed onto the block, crouching into position. The crowd noise dimmed as the referee's voice echoed through the arena. "Take your marks." The buzzer sounded, and Ethan launched himself into the air. His dive was clean, slicing through the water with precision. The familiar rhythm of his strokes took over, and for a few fleeting moments, the noise of the crowd and the pressure of the competition melted away. By the first turn, Ethan was holding his own. He executed the flip turn with the smoothness Harris had drilled into him, surfacing just behind Jacob. His breathing was steady, his stroke strong. But as the race progressed, fatigue began to creep in. His arms felt heavier, his legs slower. He could see two swimmers pulling ahead, their form impeccable. "Don't give up. One stroke at a time." Ethan pushed harder, finding reserves of strength he didn't know he had. The final stretch loomed ahead, the finish line closer with every stroke. The crowd roared, a blur of sound and motion that spurred him forward. When his hand hit the wall, Ethan gasped for air, his chest heaving as he clung to the edge of the pool. He turned to the scoreboard, his heart pounding. He'd finished second. The realization hit him like a wave. He wasn't first, but he'd surpassed every expectation, his own, his coach's, and certainly those of his classmates who had doubted him. The crowd erupted into cheers as the announcer called his name. Ethan climbed out of the pool, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Harris met him at the edge, a rare grin breaking through his usually stoic demeanor. "You did it, Ethan," Harris said, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You proved you belong here." Olivia was the first to reach him in the stands, practically tackling him with a hug. "You were amazing," she shouted, her face glowing with excitement. Ethan laughed, still catching his breath. "I couldn't have done it without you." His mom approached next, her eyes glistening with tears. "Your dad would be so proud," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan hugged her tightly, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time, he truly felt like he was honoring his father's memory, not by trying to live up to it, but by forging his own path. As the medal ceremony began, Ethan stood on the podium, the silver medal gleaming around his neck. He glanced at Jacob, who had taken first place, and nodded. "Good race, Carter," Jacob said, extending a hand. "You earned this." Ethan shook his hand, a sense of camaraderie forming between them. When the ceremony ended and the crowd began to disperse, Ethan lingered by the pool, staring at the now still water. The journey to this moment had been anything but easy, filled with doubts, setbacks, and relentless challenges. But standing there, medal in hand, he realized something profound. The race wasn't just about swimming, it was about proving to himself that he was capable of more than he'd ever imagined. As he left the arena with Olivia and his mom, Ethan felt lighter than he had in years. The water had washed away his fears, his insecurities, and the weight of others' expectations. He wasn't just a swimmer. He was a fighter. And for the first time, he knew he could face whatever came next. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more content like this, support the channel by subscribing, liking, and turning on notifications.